Welcome back. New York City taxi, Uber, and Lyft drivers are an integral part of our city, but many drivers are finding it difficult to make a decent living following the effects of inflation. Executive Director for the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, Bhairavi Desai, joins me to discuss the efforts needed to support these drivers. Bhairavi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us.
So, can you tell me about your organization, the New York Taxi Worker Alliance?
Sure, we are a labor organization of over 25,000 members. We represent drivers from across the industry, whether they're driving yellow cab, Uber, Lyft, livery, green cab, or corporate black car. Um, and we've been fighting for this raise for drivers across the board.
Now, how has the workforce in your field been affected by inflation?
Oh, and I mean, we know every American's been suffering, right? Because the price of bread and milk have gone up. In fact, the price of food is the highest it's been in 40 years, and each cost keeps going up for 17 straight months now. So drivers are affected in that way, like every other American. But they're also affected because every day they begin in a negative, and so they're paying for the cost of fuel and other operating expenses on the vehicle, including like vehicle leasing, insurance, repairs, and all of those expenses have also gone up because of inflation.
Now, according to your research, drivers are looking at paying $5,000 more for fuel by the end of the year. Why are we seeing such an increase?
Yes, that's right. Just on the cost of fuel alone, they're looking at paying $5,000 more this year than compared to last year. I mean, one can argue that really after, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that, because of the war, that the gas prices really started to skyrocket. But it's also because we have a situation where, the oil companies, the producers have not been regulated. And so even though the cost for them has actually not gone up, they have increased the cost on the consumer. And so professional drivers, like drivers, are, really getting hit by it.
Now, what has been done to address the increase?
Well, nothing much as of now. I tell you that, for example, Uber and Lyft actually enacted voluntarily a gas surcharge across the country. But the one group of drivers that they left out are New York City drivers. So if you can imagine, drivers working in, one of the most expensive cities in the world, and drivers who are really the breadbasket of these companies. New York City is the one place where they profit, you know, um, and it's the one group of drivers that they're actually punishing. So while Uber and Lyft drivers have been left out by the companies, compared to every other city, yellow cab, green cab drivers have not had an increase on the meter, not just, recently because of the spike in fuel, but generally they've not had an increase on the meter in 10 years.
Wow. So, I kind of want to go into talking about, I guess, some of the similarities and what these groups are fighting for. But before we jump into that, can you explain the difference between Uber and Lyft versus maybe a New York taxi? I think that we kind of all we just want to get where we're going. But I would like to know the difference in how that operates.
Sure. So, all of these services are regulated by the Taxi Limousine Commission, which is a mayoral agency. So Uber and Lyft are considered black cars by TLC regulation, which what that means is that they cannot pick up street hails. Yellow cabs are the only ones authorized to pick up a street hail across the entire city, including the airports. Green cabs can pick up, or they're what we call dual service. It means that they are dispatch like Uber and Lyft are, and they can also pick up street hails, but only above like East 96th Street and West 110th Street in Manhattan. Below that they cannot pick up street hails, and at the airports they cannot pick up. So in order for Uber and Lyft to be considered black cars, over 90% of their revenue must be electronic, meaning it cannot be cash. So those are really the I think from a consumer perspective, those are like the very minor differences. There are differences as far as the industry is concerned in terms of the number of inspections you can go through. For example, yellow cabs, the cars have a mandatory retirement. So every 6 or 7 years, they must be retired. There's also a requirement that 50% of yellow cabs must be wheelchair accessible, whereas on the black car, livery, green cab side, all combined they're all regulated under a framework called for hire vehicle. FHVs can basically share their wheelchair accessible dispatching, but yellow cabs, it was a court settlement between the city and disability rights organizations several years ago, which the Taxi Workers Alliance really supported. And many of these organizations are our strongest allies, and so we've been in favor of more accessibility across this industry, and particularly really supporting the yellow cab accessibility mandate.
All right, thank you so much for clarifying that because I was a little bit curious. So thank you. Now, why have Uber, Lyft, and taxi drivers began rallying?
We've started rallying because, I mean, the cost of inflation is at a record high. They're going to be spending $5,000 more on gasoline. That's out of pocket. Yellow cabs have not had a raise in 10 years. Uber and Lyft drivers got a very modest increase of 5.3%. So I'm sorry, I should just explain. So the TLC regulates, of course, the yellow and green cab meter, right? Which is what yellow and green cab services can charge to the passenger. The TLC also regulates what is the minimum per minute and per mile that Uber and Lyft must pay to the drivers. That was a historic first across this country. I think most people know by now Uber and Lyft are really infamous for very low pay. According to a study, an independent study that the city commissioned in 2018, more than 96 it was about I'm sorry 96% of the drivers were found to earn below like a $15 minimum wage per hour working for Uber and Lyft. It's a race to the bottom. Drivers have been in deep poverty and lifelong debt, and the past 10 years, especially for the yellow cab sector, where they've lost so much ridership while expenses have gone up, have really been tragic. We've seen 9 driver suicides, 2017, 2018. We see thousands of our members that are in a debt that is really beyond their lifetime. And I'm not just talking about the medallion debt for yellow cabs, because I think as most New Yorkers know, the number you see on top of a yellow cab is the medallion number, which is a license from the city of New York that gives a yellow cab exclusivity for street hail pickups. It peaked at $1 million at the same time that the city allowed in Uber and Lyft, essentially unregulated. And Uber and Lyft then really saturated the market with vehicles. I mean, there's a cap on the number of yellow cabs, for example. There had not been one on Uber and Lyft cars.
Mhm.
And so all of this has led to, really serious economic crisis for the drivers.
I want to know, I heard that a lot of Bronxites attended the rally. Why do you think it was so crucial, for many Bronx drivers to be present?
Many of our members live in the Bronx, particularly, Uber and Lyft drivers. I mean, they're the majority drivers in the industry now. But, many drivers, while they might, work across the city, particularly in Manhattan, they're living in the Bronx. The rents that they're having to pay in the Bronx. They're trying to raise their children in the Bronx. You cannot do any of this without earning a livable, dignified living. And so it's been crucial. We know that the Bronx has the most poverty of all the boroughs across our city. What I would actually say is this is an issue, the driver pay and the reality that there's so many drivers just barely making it, and now because of inflation are falling, into poverty wages. This is an issue that all Bronx representatives and leaders should really be concerned about. Many of our members are people that live and support the small businesses in the Bronx. They support the communities. When they're not able to pay their rent, they're not able to shop locally. All of that has a ripple effect across our borough. And, I'm also a proud Bronxite. Has a ripple effect across our borough. And we are the one borough that cannot sustain it when you look at our high levels of poverty already.
Now, I think this is super important, just for everyone. New Yorkers often take their frustration out on ride service and taxi drivers for prices. But can you explain how much or how little say these drivers have on the prices that are being asked of riders? And how should people actually react to that?
Oh, drivers have no say on the price. First of all, for Uber and Lyft, the prices are completely controlled by the companies. We know that right now, Uber and Lyft are charging passengers more than they ever have. And just so you all know, the drivers don't see that money. Drivers are paid at a static rate of per mile and per minute. And so, even if Uber is charging you more, Lyft is charging you more, it's not, the lion's share is not going to the driver. Similarly, yellow and green cab drivers, the price is set, on the meter, which is regulated by the city of New York, one that hasn't gone up in 10 years, by the way. Um, Livery black car drivers, also the prices are set by the companies and often, by private contracts, for example, on the black car side.
Now, how can people stay up to date with your organization just so they can learn a little bit more about this?
So we are online at nytwa.org. We're also pretty active on Twitter. It's at NYTWA. Um, we cannot win real justice for working people without the support of communities, whether it's drivers or messengers or, you know, building janitors. Whatever workforce, we need the support of the public for people to earn a dignified living. We live under really gross economic inequality in our country and very high levels of poverty. Working people, when you're putting in like drivers 60 to 70 hours of work a week,
Mhm.
it's just unconscionable that anybody would be under poverty.
Well, Bhairavi, thank you so much for joining me and just explaining, everything that you did today. I really learned a lot. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.